Another thing working with data is the ability to like get multiple result sets and compare those. So for example, let's say I have a football table here. Here I've got Toad. I'm connected to two different databases. One's called Sample, one's called Pod 101.3a. But here I'm just going to generate a SQL statement to the SQL editor. So this is going to open up an editor with one SQL statement in there. And I'm just going to run this query just to make sure it runs on this database. And it does. It successfully returns one result set. I'm going to close the result set here. And I'm going to select that I want to see the group execution. And what group execution allows you to do, once it is enabled, you could run a SQL statement against multiple databases if you so wish. So I could check all the databases in my list here. And you can see down here, I have two targets selected. So when I go run this now, it's going to actually execute this SQL against two databases. So for instance, you might have a staging database and a development database, and you might want to see if your test data in those areas are the same. You could use this group execute to do that. So it's going to prompt me saying, hey, do you acknowledge that you're running this against multiple targets? Yes, you are. And you can see that I actually have two result sets now, and they show up in this tabbed format. But what I typically would do if I wanted to make sure or just eyeball if my data was equal in those two different environments, I could easily right click and say compare to, and then select that result set that I want to compare to. And a dialog pops up that gives me the ability to select the results columns that I could use as key columns. So I'm going to select the player ID and click compare. And what happens now is Toad comes up and displays this data diff viewer. So it shows the differences of data between those two result sets. And these buttons on top can be used to filter the displaying rows. So for example, if I only wanted to show the rows that were unequal, I would click on this. It's going to show me the unequal rows. If I only wanted to show the rows that were in the first result set, not the second, in both result sets, but are different, and in the second result set. So I typically like using uh, this view right here that shows me all the differences, and then I can actually use these buttons to scroll to the next differences. So for example, this row is a source only row. It's in the first result set. It's not in the second one. So it shows up in this manner. The next difference here are rows that show up in the target, but not the source. And it's going to wrap around. Now I'm going to click and show the results that are actually in both result sets, but have some differences. And you can notice as you click on the grid on top, the bottom grid gets updated to actually show the details. So you can see that this row on the first result set, this person, his position was a defensive back. It's been updated to be a linebacker. And again, his years pro values change from 1 to 2 years. This person has a different team that he's associated with. So very easy to quickly identify data in two tables. And they could be in two different databases, maybe one production, one stage, one test, one development, etc., to give you an idea if your data is the same in those platforms or not. And going a little step further in that same scenario, if you wanted to, for example, you could run any type of script along with group execute. So if you had a script that, for example, you wanted to create a table in a couple of different environments rather quickly, you could type in a simple create table statement, right? Run that while group execute is enabled. And you can see that the table is actually successfully created in both databases, or if it was DB2 ZOS, in both subsystems. So that's another important way that you could leverage group execute, executing scripts across multiple databases, multiple subsystems. All right, I'm going to close some of these SQL editors down and then demonstrate another feature of Toad that deals with data. Again, maybe you want to sync your data across databases or across tables, etc. So let's say, for example, you've got a table, and we're just going to actually open the data compare facility with Toad for DB2. And this allows you, again, to see the data differences, but not only to see them, but actually to synchronize them. So you could run this on the same database if you map your schemas, or across databases. I'm going to run this on the same database across schemas and show you what I mean. So this wizard allows you to specify column keys, again, that we're going to compare on. And since both of these tables have primary keys identified on the player ID column, you really don't have to do anything else. If you wanted to limit some data, if you didn't want to retrieve all the data in the source or target table, you could specify a where clause in either of those to limit the amount of data being fetched. But in this case, I'm going to just click OK and take the default. Here we have some options where you could ignore things such as case in text or white space in text columns and ignore blob columns. We're going to leave the defaults here and click compare. And this generates a little bit of summary here that shows you how many rows were in the source only, how many were different, how many were target only, and how many were equal. Once you click finish, Toad's going to display a control that's very similar to the diff viewer. Again, you could actually see your source and target tables side by side. You can only display the rows that have changed amongst those. And here you'll also notice that there's a button to include. If you want to create a sync script, those changes would be included in there. Now you could always run the data comparison wizard with multiple tables. And if you did, there would be a table list on top. And as you clicked on the table, the report below would reflect the differences for that table. Now I'm going to click this Synchronization Wizard button here, and up comes the Synchronization Wizard, and allows me to specify a file, do things like drop and create foreign keys before I generate in my script before I actually generate the inserts or deletes. And I'm just going to walk through, taking the defaults here, and this is going to open up a script in the Toad editor. And this script will synchronize, that will bring my target to the same values of my source. So if I had a couple extra rows out there in my target, it's going to delete those. I had some rows with differences, it's going to set those differences to be the same. I had a couple of rows that were in my source only, so it's going to insert those into the target. So if I run the script, it's going to synchronize my target table to be just like my source table.